Hello and welcome to The Current Thing with me, Nick Dixon. And today we are very lucky to have returning to the show Mr. Ben Habib. How are you, Ben?
Very well indeed, thank you, Nick. Thank you for having me on the show. Pleasure to be back.
Yeah, well, no worries. I mean, last time we did it in the studio, you were still with Reform UK. So many things have changed. Seems like a long time ago. And we're doing this the day that the election results from the local elections are still coming in, Friday, the 2nd of May. Reform have won the Runcorn by election. They've done very well in the locals. So I suppose the obvious question is what was your take on those election results? And do you now regret leaving Reform?
So let me do the first question first, if I may.
Yeah.
So, not surprised by the election result at all. It mimics the 2016 vote to leave the EU, the return to office of Theresa May, albeit on a smaller majority in 2017, and then the May elections for the European Parliament, which returned me to Brussels along with 28 other, Brexit Party MEPs, and the vote for Boris Johnson in 2019. All these votes were votes to take our country back, to take back control, to put up our borders, a proud, independent, sovereign, prosperous United Kingdom. All these votes in that direction. That's what they're for. The only outlier, the only outlying vote that we had was in July 2024. And I explained that because the way to understand what happened in July 2024 is not to think of it as a landslide in Labour's favour, but actually a withdrawal of support from the electorate for most people. And and that's a fact because Labour got fewer votes in 2024 than they did in 2019 under Corbyn. But because many people stayed at home, about 4 million more people just didn't vote. The vote turnout dropped from 67.5% to 59%. You got this thumping Labour landslide, which indicates that perhaps the country was turning left and going towards Labour. But it's not true. And the country, frankly, is not left nor right. The country just wants to be governed with the interests of the country at heart. And they are ascribing those hopes and investing those hopes in Reform UK because they can't trust the Labour Party now. They've seen what the Labour Party does in government, and they've saw what the Conservative Party did for 14 years in government. So they're pinning all their hopes in Reform UK. Reform UK carries that baton. It has energized the electorate again because they got 5 MPs in the last election, and and the electorate are looking, please, they're looking for salvation, and Reform, at least on the face of it, offers that salvation. Do I regret leaving Reform? If I was a career politician and I wished to make it up the greasy pole of political advancement, then I would probably be regretting it right now. But I'm not. I'm in it for the same reason that people voted for the things that I've just been discussing. And for me, it's not about party, it's about putting the country first and making sure that we get the agenda and the set of new laws and a form of governance that delivers it. And notwithstanding Reform's terrific success in the local elections and the victory in Runcorn and Helsby, I just don't think Reform is the answer.
Hmm. Interesting. So yeah, it was definitely a loveless landslide for Labour. Absolutely agreed on that. It was. It felt as much as Starmer said it was a great victory. It never felt that way, and I think these sort of show that. Although these results, although is it right to compare it to things like European elections? I know the BBC did that as well, but is that the correct thing? Because basically, do you think people will go back after this in a general election to their typical
No,
voting habits?
I don't.
No.
No, it is different in the sense that people have come out now for a specific political party. And I think going back, I don't think it's happening. If anyone thinks this is midterm blues, think again. The Conservatives got a thumping in July 2024 and they got a thumping yesterday. The Labour Party got, albeit a loveless landslide in July 2024, but they got a real thumping yesterday. And this is not midterm. This is 9 months into their tenure. No, this is the country absolutely saying we've had enough. We've had enough. We tried to persuade you in 2016 to do the right thing. You didn't. We gave Boris Johnson another chance. He squandered it. Now we want absolute determined change. And we are in a very different political environment. It's no longer a two-party system.
Yeah, I agree. And Starmer doesn't seem to agree. He said the message I take out of these elections is that we need to go further and we need to go faster on the change that people want to see. And that's what I'm determined to do. So he seems to think it's just, oh, we need to implement our awful Labour plans. I shouldn't be so I shouldn't be so partisan. We need to sort of enact our plans quicker. But that seems a bizarre message to take from it. It's more like a rejection of Labour's failed budgets, their failures on immigration and so on.
Yeah.
Don't you think?
Well, I think Labour, the way I understand Labour, the way I make sense of them, is that um, they're not really for the country. Starmer is an avowed Europhile. You may know Nick, and I've said it a few times on GB News and other channels, that he was caught unawares in September 2023 in Canada. Are you aware of this? Where he thought the camera was off him, and the camera wasn't off him, it was recording. And he said that if I were ever to become prime minister, I would align the United Kingdom so closely with the European Union that no one would be able to tell that we weren't in it. And which is precisely what he's about to do on the 19th of May. You know, when we've got this thing coming up in this summit with other European heads. And that's the deal he's going to be doing, taking us really back into even more alignment with the EU. And the agenda that he's delivered in office so far is his ideological agenda. He's probably looking at it thinking, well, this is I have to get the unpopular stuff out of the way. But once I've taken us back in alignment with the EU and I've had my wicked way with the British public, um, things will settle down. They'll get used to it. And I can come round again in 2029 and hopefully, dupe them into voting for me again. That's how he's thinking. Um, Starmer, and I've been picked up on it by a number of people because it is eyebrow raising, but Starmer, in my view, is anti-British. He doesn't actually believe in this country. He would much rather be governed by Brussels. He doesn't trust the electorate. He wants to have supranational institutions, international laws which are beyond reproach, so-called independent bodies, domestic bodies, quangos, full of professionals running the country. He doesn't believe in the dirty democratic process where politicians get elected, get defenestrated, and the people eventually get what they want. He doesn't like that, and and I think he's therefore fundamentally anti-British, and so he's going down his path, and I don't think anything's going to deviate him from that path, um, unless somehow those of us who believe in this country, who want to put this country first, who all the things that I've just been discussing, unless we can somehow get power, in which case, he'll be out on his arse.
Yeah, I mean, he certainly can't deviate. I'm just trying to find my own description. Oh yeah, I said it. I called him a dead-eyed shark pushing ever forward towards his next grim mechanical task. So we agree on that. I mean,
Yeah,
he can't deviate. I'm just going to carry on my task. So he yeah. I didn't know the Canada thing. I knew the thing that he said openly to Emily Maitlis was that he was Davos over Westminster, which I thought was shocking
yeah,
enough. The EU alignment doesn't surprise me because anytime I speak to blob people or extended type blob jobs, because I'm in North London, I meet these people, and they all assumed he would go back into the EU. That's why they like him. So there's definitely a certain
yeah.
centrist dad vote that wants that, but perhaps I don't think it's the majority of the country, but there's definitely a hardcore vote that wants that.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's the modern Labour Party. That is not the Labour Party that stands for the working class. Fundamentally, the European Union operates policies that are not supportive of domestic working classes in the member states of the European Union. He doesn't represent traditional Labour values, Starmer.
No, I think people have realised that. I mean, if you look at the voting patterns by salary, those on 75k plus are most likely to vote Labour. Those on under 20k are most likely to vote Reform. It's the inverse
Well, there you
relationship.
go.
Yeah,
Yeah,
so it's completely changed. So, but now even those people are perhaps abandoning some. I'm not sure. Maybe the hardcore centrist dads stay with him, but they've certainly been abandoned by many people. And that's what Farage always said. To be fair, that he will get votes from Labour just as much as it's the Tories, and that's what these election results show. So many Labour votes coming to Reform.
yeah.
That's not really a
Except
question.
they're
Go on.
not Labour votes anymore because the Labour Party doesn't represent them.
No,
They're
right.
really, the schism in politics is not between left and Labour on the left or conservatives and reform on the right. The schism in politics is between those of us who want to make policies for the betterment of the United Kingdom and its people, and those of us who want to be governed by the sort of liberal global elite, as I call them. And Starmer, and frankly, at least half the Conservative Party fall into that bracket. That's why people call them the Uniparty. That's why they can't see much of a difference between the Labour Party and the Conservatives, because they're both part of that ideological supranational liberal global order. They don't believe in this. They actually don't believe in this country.
Yeah.
And we do. I think you do clearly.
I
Yeah,
absolutely do, and I don't think that's even controversial to say. Look at Starmer's treatment of Southport. Now, certain media class people say, "Oh, he's handled it well." I don't think he handled it well. I wonder, and I don't know if you agree, but if there's a sort of deep resentment about that amongst people, the kinds of people that are voting in these local elections, because he seemed so anti-British people, and that he immediately condemned people as far right when actually they were protesting. Many of them, perhaps too aggressively, but many of them were protesting the brutal murder of children. And you think, well, maybe a little bit of leeway on that, but no, Lucy Conley went to jail for a post famously. So it's. Do you think there's a resentment about that?
I think there's huge resentment. And I think the reason the protests turned violent is significantly down to what Starmer did in the aftermath of the killings of those three innocent young children and the stabbings of many others. And of course, we subsequently discovered, without wishing to digress, that the brutality of those killings is beyond imagination. One of those children was stabbed 125 times, and then Axel Rudakabana tried to behead her. um, it's absolutely gut-wrenchingly sickening what happened. But the people knew, the people could smell something was really untoward. Obviously, the killing of children is untoward, full stop. But there was something very sinister about what happened in Southport. And instead of the Prime Minister getting up and saying, look, it was a second generation Rwandan who was settled in this country, and it was a brutal killing of three innocent young girls. And I am going to put the protective blanket around the British people, and I'm going to do my level best to make sure this never happens again. And named Axel Rudakabana or whatever needed to be done, the British people would have been calm. They would have understood, okay, the Prime Minister gets it. He's been straight up with us, but he didn't. We were told that the killer was a Welshman. By no measure is Axel Rudakabana a Welshman. He may hold British citizenship. He may live in Cardiff. That doesn't make him a Welshman. A Welshman, colloquially, uh, and the term can only be used colloquially, is a man who standing out in his field with his sheep. That's the image it conjures up when you say someone's a Welshman, or you say that they're an Englishman. They go to the city in their bowler hat. Are you with me? That's the imagery he conjured up when he said he was a Welshman, and he was deflecting, and the people knew that he was deflecting, and that's why we got the kind of knee-jerk reaction to the Prime Minister's response to Southport. And then he made things even worse, as you say, Nick, by saying, all of you, basically, I would have suspected working class Labour voters, actually, many of them, all of you are far right. You're thugs, even those of you who just posted stuff on Twitter and other platforms. And I am directing the criminal justice system to arrest you, remand you, and then incarcerate you, find you guilty and incarcerate you. There was no room for latitude. The Home Office even put out a tweet saying, these people are basically guilty before the trials had even taken place. It was one of the best examples of two-tier criminal justice. And so Starmer is very much anti the working class, uh, and without wishing to put a racial hint on it, well, I do wish to put a racial hint. I want to call it out. He's anti the white working class. That's what he is. The white working British, the white British working class.
Yeah, I agree. And he, yes, and people were advised to plead guilty, which was bad advice, and they were
Yeah.
just shopped off to prison immediately. Other people were let out of prison, including a man who stabbed someone to death the day he was released. So it's an absurd and narco tyranny. Innocent or very nearly innocent people going to jail. People who just put up posts that are technically crimes, but aren't on the same measure. So yeah, and I was going to ask this question later, but it just brings me to this question: do you think that we are? I mean, there's been a popular podcast with Professor David Betts who said we are heading for civil unrest. Do you see us heading for increasing civil unrest in the near future?
Well, I think one of the characteristics of the British people is that it takes a hell of a lot to get us off our sofas and do anything. Civil unrest I mean, we saw that a bit after Southport. That was obviously civil unrest. Um, but I think it'll take a lot for that to become a kind of national. We're not like the French, you know. If anything happens in France, all of France goes alight with, you know, burning tires and smashing windows down the Champs-Elysees, and the police come out with much more draconian measures to subdue crowds, etc. We may end up like France. I mean, I think some of the policies we're practicing in this country, mass immigration, coupled with DEI without any integration, is producing multicultural silos. Often in antipathy to each other. So for example, we saw the other day, very recently, when there were volleys of shots fired across the Kashmir border, we saw people in London, Indian communities and ethnically Indian communities in London, kicking off against ethnically Pakistani communities in London, and and that kind of issue in the United Kingdom, I think, is going to get worse unless we start practicing some form of integration and getting our immigration under control. And if it gets worse, then we may end up with the kind of draconian policing that they have in France and the light touch policing, which frankly, we've lost a lot of our light touch policing anyway. You don't see a Bobby on the beat armed only with a truncheon. I mean, nowadays everyone's got a bulletproof jacket on, a cap, and they've got a pistol minimum, you know. And so we are moving away to a less settled, less harmonious, less integrated society. And I think that's all bad. Whether we get to civil unrest or not, you know, remains to be seen. I wish someone would just shake the governing class of this country and get them to wake up so that we don't end up there. We don't want that. I mean, I'm sure you agree with me, Nick, that we want to go back to the kind of community by consent policing that we had when we were children.
Yeah.
Um, you know, where the Bobby often knew the people's names and you knew the Bobby's name, you know.
Yeah, the Peel's principles and police by consent, absolutely. Although the only place we weirdly have a sort of bastardized version of that is with these so-called community leaders, where you go into certain neighborhoods that are sort of ghettos and you say, "Are we allowed to do some policing here next Thursday? Do you mind?" And these are community leaders, and we all pretend like this is normal. It's like, "Yeah, I'll tell the lads to put their weapons in the mosque." You're like, "What?" That kind of thing was
Yeah.
going on, absolutely insane. So we have it for our communities, which mean self-segregating communities, basically. Very strange.
Yeah.
Um,
Well, it's two-tier criminal justice again, isn't it?
yeah, and I mean, I heard someone said to me that I think it was they were talking about Singapore. They were saying, look, when you have multiculturalism, you have authoritarianism because there's nothing else to do. You have to do things. Even the sort of trivial example, like the Lib Dems saying fine people for loud music, which I think is already the law, but because certain people have come in, don't understand that we don't like that kind of noise in the public space. That's one trivial example, relatively trivial. It still is annoying, but when you don't have a shared culture and shared assumptions, you need laws instead.
Yeah, and there's a lack of trust between the various different cultures. An inherent lack of trust. They're not marrying each other, they're not dating each other, they're not integrating with each other. They're living separately. Some may be more affluent than others, some may hold views that are anti aesthetical to others, and they end up confronting each other. And religion is obviously one area where that can, you know, manifest itself. So I think we are in difficult, you know, in difficult times, and our governing class need to wake up to it, and they need to have the debate without fear or favor, and then they need to enact policies which will settle the United Kingdom. I hate it when politicians dismiss the culture wars as culture wars, and they go, "Oh, it's just a culture war." No, the culture, you know, there are effectively three really critical components in the United Kingdom. There's our constitution, our culture, and the people of this country. They're the three key components. And, you know, the culture is crucial because you can't have a settled, harmonious society. You can't have a society unless you have a settled culture. You can't have a nation state unless you have a settled culture.
Mm. Yeah, and on that point, and I was going to get onto it later, but we've almost touched on it. This sectarian politics. Ed West just wrote a very good piece in the Spectator, and he talked about Labour's mixture of cynicism and naivety that led to them importing all kinds of people and then sort of pandering to them, and changing our customs. And he points out the danger of this, particularly because the people who vote in sort of clannish blocks are most likely to be the most hardline examples of their community. They're not going to You might get individuals voting differently, but these block votes, Labour have pandered to. Now, Labour are actually the victims of it because they're losing to so-called independents who sort of base their whole policy on whether you're pro-Palestine or not. But what do we do about that now that that's not a case necessarily of immigration, because these people are now here? It was immigration at some point, but they're here, presumably many as citizens if they're voting. So what do we do about that now?
Well, many of them have citizenship, obviously, but there are many, many more who don't, and they get those who've got citizenship do obviously get encouragement and succor and support from those who haven't. And I think, the first step is to make sure that we absolutely cut back on immigration and have as few people in this country now going forward that come from cultures that are very different to ours, as few as possible. I know that might sound inflammatory to some people on the so-called left, but that is what we have to do. And then for those people who are here and they've got British citizenship, there has to be a positive program for integration. There are many political commentators who talk about the subtlety, and again, it comes down to a kind of consensual approach to nationhood. They talk about the United Kingdom only existing because of the consent of the English people, the Welsh, the Scots, and the Northern Irish. And it's all a subtle coming together of the peoples of this country. And I think, sadly, that subtlety is no longer good enough. We can't take our nationhood for granted anymore. And we've got to be less subtle in the way that we go about projecting what it means to be British. And so, for example, I know that there are some people who raise their eyebrows is when you say all schools should sing the national anthem every morning. When I say that, I think we've got to do that. We've got to start singing the national anthem. I think schools have got to start flying the Union flag. I think we've got to teach Christianity at school. We've got to teach British history, not through a prism of the slave trade and all the awfulness which went with our imperial past, but with a more balanced approach, explaining how all the great things that we did for the globe, of which there are many, and I can enumerate them for you if you want me to do it. But, we've got to be much more self-confident as a country in our belief system and what it is, where it is we came from, because we are nothing more than our history. Our present tense and our present manifestation in our belief system is nothing more than our history. And we need to recover our history. We need to restore our history, our self-belief, our confidence, and then we need to project that more. And the people who are here need to buy into that. And that's just something that may take decades now, given the number of people here that don't associate themselves with our history, our tradition, and our belief systems, etc. So I think we've just got to. It's a long haul, but we've got to start somewhere, and we've got to do it robustly. The DEI's got to go. Progressive discrimination has to end. Everyone's got to be equal in front of the law.
Hmm. Oh, well, DEI is insane. I mean, actually, I think it was Renaud Camus talking about it. He, very controversial figure, but interesting to read. He was saying how what we have now is we pretend that our people don't exist, our meaning the kind of, I don't know, native people of Europe, but that all other cultures sort of aggressively do exist. That's the strange thing about DEI. It sort of says we don't really have a culture. White people should sort of shut up, but everyone else aggressively asserts their culture. So it's not actually about anti-racism. It's about
It's
only,
racism.
yeah, yeah,
It's actually racism.
clearly.
And progressive discrimination is just discrimination. And effectively, what we're doing is importing cultures and ideologies and belief systems that are actually muscular, much less developed, if I may say so, and less sophisticated and subtle than ours, muscular sets of beliefs. And then we're putting them in a protected blanket and saying, you're protected. You can go on believing this. And in fact, we'll celebrate your culture and we'll take a back seat to your culture because you're guests in our country. You're new to our country and we want you to get on and get jobs and be valuable economic contributors to society, blah 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 blah. And we're going to give you this protected status and progressively discriminate in your favor, setting aside the majority, which is effectively reverse racism, which is racism.
Yeah, that's appalling. But it's also a naivety. We've done away with strong feeling. I mean, speaking about singing the national anthem, we used to grow up singing hymns twice a day in assembly and things like that. That would be
Yeah, and
great to bring
hymns.
back. But um,
Absolutely.
but we now have this deracinated culture. We're not Christian anymore, or most people aren't, and we certainly don't have strong feelings about it. And whereas we're bringing in cultures, they're in a completely different. They have a completely different mindset. They're very strongly in favor of their particular thing, their particular religion, and we're so naive and assuming And this is what Edward West talks about the naivety part. We assume they'll just become completely British when they come in, and they'll be like, "Oh, yeah, religion's a private matter," or "We don't take it too seriously." But no, they have a completely different mindset, and we've been so actually arrogant about that, assuming everyone follows our mindset, but they don't. They come from completely different
It's,
cultures.
absolutely. And, at one level, um, I mean, not at one level, it's absurd, frankly, that liberalism has got to the point now where, in the pursuit of so-called liberal values and allowing people to be self-determining, that we now accept and think it's the right of people to wear niqabs, the head-to-toe covering in society, and that we mustn't call them out for it because that is their right. But of course, what is the niqab if it is not the reversal of the 100 years of emancipation that was founded on the soapbox of liberalism, for want of a better way of expressing it. But it was liberalism that emancipated women, and it is liberalism that is now suppressing women through importing different cultures that have a different approach to women. And we're saying, well, it's their liberal right to be this way. And we're setting ourselves backwards. We're undoing so much good that came through our so-called liberal democracy.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, and there's so much on that, but I want to get back to some other stuff. But yeah, France bans the
Yeah.
niqab, don't they? But they ban it on a sort of safety. They can sort of cite safety as one reason. Also, France is more aggressively secular, you could argue, but they ban the niqab, so that kind of thing does happen. But I just wanted to get back to, well, we can talk about immigration. There's so much, but I want to get back so we don't run out of time to the just the implication of these elections, because if Reform do win in 2029, which looks sort of more and more likely, having won this crushing victory, if you want to call it that, in the elections, what do you think they'll actually achieve? Because we talked about a lot of the problems, which some of the parties on the alternative parties are very good at identifying. But what do you think they'll actually manage to fix if they did win?
So I don't think they'll fix anything. That's my concern with reform, being utterly frank. And people thus far in this interview may have been clapping their hands, and your typical viewer may have been clapping their hands, thinking Ben's talking absolute sense. And now they're probably rolling their eyes and think, bitter Ben. But it's got nothing to do with bitter Ben or twisted. I think Farage described me as bitter and twisted. It's got nothing to do with that. And it's this: in the pursuit of power, Farage is setting aside the principles, frankly, which made Farage into the persona that he is. And the British people aren't actually paying enough attention, in my view, to what Farage is up to. His persona is so big. Farage is reform, reform is Farage, and his persona is so big that he can carry the kind of pro-British torch and the hopes and aspirations of British people, whilst actually now doing quite the opposite of what we would wish him to be doing. And he is becoming part of the so-called uniparty. Um, so for example, it's a remarkable set of results. This, as we were saying earlier, was it before we started the conversation? Remarkable set of local election results. Perhaps the most remarkable, though, was the victory in Runcorn and Helsby. And I say it's the most remarkable partly because of the massive turnaround in the Labour majority from 15,000 in July 2024 to losing the election now, but also because of the candidate that Reform UK fielded. Now, this is a lady called Sarah Potchin, who was thrown out of the Conservative Party. So she's a former Tory who left under a cloud. Not exactly, covered in glory because of as a result of her political past, but perhaps more importantly, someone who has welcomed Syrian and Afghan illegal migrants into Cheshire, who's attended transgender events where children have been present, and who has actually spoken. In favour of the withdrawal of the winter fuel allowance from the elderly. These are three critical policies that we would expect reform to be standing against. We wouldn't expect reform to have a transgender supporting illegal migrant settling, winter fuel allowance withdrawing candidate. And she was so uh, sort of out of kilter, I think, with reform's basic principles that in order to be able to purvey her, they deleted her social media history. I don't know if you're aware of that, Nick, that when they revealed her as a candidate, they deleted her social media history. And And she's not the first one. They've done this a lot. So Charlie Mullins, the avowed and avowed Remainer, was nearly put forward by Farage as a candidate, and I think he's now not coming forward as a candidate because of some of the things that I said about Charlie Mullins. But this was no jab, no jobs. Charlie Mullins, he was a complete sort of vaccination nutcase, pro-vaccine nutcase. Uh, uh, who wants to rejoin the EU, but he was going to be a candidate for reform. And Farage himself, as you I'm sure know, is on the record saying he's not concerned about the rate of demographic change in this country. He cares about the culture, but he's not concerned about the rate of demographic change. They are two sides of the same coin. You can't talk about the culture if you're not also talking about the rate of demographic change. Even Kemi Badenoch gets that. She says she is concerned about the rate of demographic change. Then he's on the record saying that he doesn't believe it's possible to deport all those who've entered this country illegally. Well, if you're not prepared to deport all those who are here illegally, you're not presenting even a deterrent to illegal migration. Uh, are you with me?
Yeah,
And he said many other things besides, which aren't getting through to the British people, but they will get through in the end. And of course, the other big problem with Nigel Farage, which I'm going to speak without any fear, is that he is a narcissist. And so reform is Farage. Farage is reform. Lots of reform supporters say that without Farage, there's no reform, and I accept that. That's the case. And he's not building a broad and deep team of people that could govern. So I'm answering your question. Even if he had joined up political philosophy, which I don't think he does, but if he did, he's not fielding the kind of team required. You would need a team of Samsons now to undo the damage that's taken place over the last 30, 40 years. Yet whenever anyone gets, too big for their boots, arguably, I was the first one I'm not the first one to have been cancelled by Farage, but as a former reform deputy leader, when he came back, he wanted me out. And the same goes for Rupert Lowe. When Rupert Lowe became, the big parliamentarian endorsed by Elon Musk, showed a bit of, promise in his own right, he was set aside. And not only did they set him aside, they actually, in the process, tried to destroy the man by making a police complaint against him and making, frankly, entirely misleading statements about whether or not he's a bully, indicating that he's a bully when he clearly isn't. And the reform has significant issues, um, one of which is Farage, the human being, as compared to Farage, the persona. The persona stands for everything that you and I want. The human being doesn't. And so there's an issue.
yeah, lots there. I mean, it does divide the audience between. I've had things as well. I don't get called bitter, but I do get called. Stop spoiling it, Nick. It's reform's time. But of course, in my role, I have to just tell the truth as I see it. And I did vote reform, so I'm not some reform hater. But I certainly criticise them over the treatment of Rupert Lowe, which we may get into. But yeah, it does start to look as though there are basically a lot of Tories. I mean, Lee Anderson was a Tory, Andrea Jenkins, Sarah Poachin, Farage, a kind of spiritual Tory, you could say. So there is that.
Tim Montgomery, who was
Right.
a Cameroonian,
Yeah,
you
yeah.
know?
So there is that
Yeah.
critique that it's just the Tories with a slightly different hue, which is turquoise instead of blue. But yeah, I mean, I do wonder as well about some of the other things you said, where I was very much the same. Why is Farage saying this in the Stephen Edgerton interview? Why is he so soft on mass deportations? Why is he saying strange things about Islam to Winston Marshall? But then lately, he's changed his tune a bit. He's become more aggressive about it. He's promised a minister for deportations. So do you think he's changed his mind? And would a minister for deportations be effective?
I mean,
All right, that is the end of the free episode. But if you want the full podcast, go to nickdixon.net for all the extra content, all my articles. That is my Substack, nickdixon.net. And we need your help to keep this whole thing going, keep the lights on, this amazing production, hiring people, etc. nickdixon.net to support us. It's £5 a month, which is about the cost of some sort of fancy latte in London, or there's a slight discount if you get the yearly option, or it's just £5 a month. So we'll see you on nickdixon.net, and thank you very much.